بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Today we start the unit on Ghusul. Ghusul means the formal ritual that is performed when a person enters into a state of major spiritual impurity. So just to refresh our minds, this tends to be basic information. There are two types of spiritual impurity. And when we say spiritual impurity, that has nothing to do with your physical self. It doesn't mean you are a worse person or you are in a worse state. It's just a term. Okay? There is minor spiritual impurity. That is the result of using the bathroom, passing gas, sleeping, right? And you remove minor spiritual impurity with wudu. There's nothing else that removes it, right? The other is major spiritual impurity, and there are five or six scenarios in which a person enters major spiritual impurity. One is married.
Intimacy.
I'm just trying to find the words that are a little bit, more proper.
Your auntie, so it's okay.
Okay, well.
She's your auntie,
Right. So you have relations with one's spouse. You have release of reproductive fluids. Number 3, specifically for ladies, her monthly cycle. 4, again for ladies, postpartum bleeding. The 5th is entering into Islam. Right? Scholars differ here. Entering into Islam puts a person into requires them, I should say, to do ghusl. Scholars differ here. And then the 6th is death, and ghusl is required, right, as part of the process of burial. Right? So these are the 6 scenarios. 5 of them the scholars agree. 1 of them the scholars differ, and that is it obligatory for somebody who becomes a Muslim to take a shower, to do ghusl? All right? And we know that ghusl is pretty much immersing, or not, I shouldn't say immersing, for water to reach the entirety of your body. For water to reach the entirety of your body. If that happens, along with the intention of performing ghusl, you're done. Anything beyond that in terms of action is considered to be sunnah. So there are only 2 things that need to be done for ghusl to be performed. 1, the intention of ghusl, and 2, for water to reach the entirety of your body. Right? That's it. Beyond that, it's sunnah practices. Bab al-wudu qabl al-ghusl. Chapter about performing wudu before performing ghusl. Now I said that the only thing that removes minor spiritual impurity is wudu, right? So if somebody goes and says, you know what, I'm going to take a shower. I don't have major spiritual impurity, but I have minor spiritual impurity. I'm just going to go ahead and perform ghusl with the intention of removing my minor spiritual impurity. That doesn't work. Doesn't count. The exception of Abu Hanifa, right? But the majority opinion, which I follow, no, doesn't work. You have to perform wudu. Wudu is a specific act of worship that's meant to be done for a specific reason. You cannot alternate. All right? Similarly, if somebody has major spiritual impurity, they cannot perform wudu as an alternative to ghusl. It can only be removed through ghusl. The only exception to both of these is if you have no water. And then you perform tayammum, and tayammum removes both as an exception due to a very specific circumstance, all right? But what this chapter is titled, Performing Wudu Prior to Performing Ghusl. We understand this as, even though to perform ghusl, all you need to do is those 2 things, intention and water reaching the entirety of your body, it is a sunnah practice that when you perform ghusl, you perform the actions of wudu as well.
Before or after?
Here it's saying before, right? But depending on where you start ghusl, you'll see that the ghusl of the Prophet ﷺ, he performed wudu at the beginning. So we'll go through it here. عن عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها زوج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ورضي عنها أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان إذا اغتسل من الجنابة بدأ فغسل يديه ثم يتوضأ كما يتوضأ للصلاة. So here Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says that if the Prophet performed ghusl, he would start by washing his hands, right? And then performing wudu the way he performed wudu for salah. Right? ثم يدخل أصابعه في الماء فيخلل بها أصول شعره. And then he would put his hands in the water. So remember, they don't have running water, they don't have a faucet, they don't have a shower head. They had a bucket. Right? So he's making ghusl from that bucket. He's not dunking himself in the bucket. He's not sitting in the bucket, but rather he's taking water out of the bucket and putting it on himself. All right? So once he performed wudu, he would put his hand back in the water to get his hands wet, and he would start to rub the scalp of his head. Because remember, in order for ghusl to be performed, the water needs to reach the entirety of your body, including your scalp. Your hair might prevent that, so the Prophet ﷺ would rub his hands in his hair to make sure water reached it. Now, with a shower head, is water reaching the scalp? Yeah. Without rubbing? Yes. Okay. Now, if you want to do it just to perfect your ghusl, no problem.
But you don't have to make sure your hair is oiled. It's just the scalp.
Mm-hmm.
The roots of the hair.
Yes. So for women who have their hair braided or have their hair in a tied up, right? You don't have to undo that to perform ghusl. Okay? So, yes, the lady, her water needs to reach her scalp, but if she has her hair tied up, right, she doesn't have to undo that. Continuing the hadith, ثم يصب على رأسه ثلاث غرف بيديه ثم يفيض على جلده كله. So then the Prophet would take water like this. He'd put his hands like this, get some water, and he would put it over his head, pour it over his head 3 times, and then he would just start wiping his body with the water that's running down, right? And he would go to all of his body. That's ghusl. عن ميمونة زوج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ورضي عنها قالت توضأ رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وضوءه للصلاة غير رجليه. Yeah, so I'll get to what that means here. وغسل فرجه وما أصابه من الأذى ثم أفاض عليه الماء ثم تنحى رجليه فغسلهما هذه غسله من الجنابة. So here, the Prophet, Maymuna, again, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, is describing his ghusl. And she says that the Prophet would start by making wudu, right, without washing his feet. Okay, well, washing your feet is part of wudu. Why is he not doing it? You'll see here in a second. So he'd perform wudu. Imagine with me, the Prophet ﷺ performs wudu in its entirety with the exception of his feet. And then he would clean off the area of his body where there might be some residue from his relationship with his wife. And then he would pour water on him, and then he would move from where he was, and then wash his feet. Okay, why? Well, when you're first washing your body, right, there might be things that are dirty. So that dirt is going down where? To the feet, and it's puddling where? Under your feet. So while you're doing this, water that is already dirty is gathering under your feet. So it makes no sense to wash your feet only for water that is dirty to go back on your feet. So when he was about to conclude, he would move from there to a dry space and then wash his feet so that his feet are fully clean, right? So there's no najasa, there's no impurity there, right? Now, in our times today, you have running water, you have an open, faucet and whatnot. That's not the case. So you don't have to literally, when you perform ghusl under the shower head, to move in order to do it. Now, if you want to do it because it reminds you of the Prophet ﷺ, more power to you. But from a purely fiqhi perspective, you don't need to do that.
I just want a question here. Before in previous wudu, it's muwala, it's just the muwala, you have to do one
Yes.
after the other.
Yes.
So how does that come with this one?
Ghusl has no muwala because
because he did wudu. He did the wudu except for his feet.
Yeah. Maybe you can say, it's a good question. Muwala means consecutive, right? Consecutively. What you could say is that he is, that consecutiveness, if that's a word, is the fact that you are engaged in the act of worship. So let's say somebody is very slow at performing wudu, right? Let's say they have OCD. So they keep going back to something, right? Even though they're taking a long time to do it, they are engaged in it. So the muwala is still there. The consecutiveness is still there, even though it's taking a long time. So consecutiveness does not connote a short period of time. What it means is that you don't pause or stop what you are doing to do something else. So here the Prophet ﷺ, although he did not he did not wash his feet except after a period, he was still engaged in the formal act, in the formal ritual, right? That's one thing. Or what we can say here is that although he's performing the acts of wudu, he's performing ghusl. He's not performing wudu, he's performing ghusl. And so the ghusl does not require muwala, does not require consecutiveness. It's not one of the conditions of a valid ghusl.
So what you're saying is that you do the ghusl first and then the wudu. But you would only do the ghusl if there was major impurities, not minor.
I don't understand your question. Can you repeat it?
Like if you do wudu when you had because you went to sleep or you went to
Mm-hmm.
but you're doing ghusl for for purification on another level.
Yeah.
So what they are saying is that you do that first and then the wudu.
No. Here the Prophet is doing wudu first.
Wudu first.
And then
The ghusl part.
and then performing what needs to be done to get water to the entirety of the body. Does that clarify?
Yes, but I would imagine that if you were in the major impurity state, that you would want to be purified first and then you would.
No, but this is an act of worship, right? But this is an act of worship. Don't see it as like this is some sort of medical procedure where things need to be done in a logical way. This is something spiritual, right? There's nothing about you that changes before or after wudu or before or after ghusl, right? You're still the same. So there isn't this logical process that, okay, in order for me to be fully clean, then I should do it this way. It's not about being fully clean. It's about performing an act of worship.
So the wudu first,
Mm-hmm.
and then making sure that you have water on all your extremities and
Mhm.
then the feet.
Yes.
So if you don't have any major impurity, you can just do directly ghusl, and you don't have to do the wudu before that, right?
No, if you don't have major spiritual impurity, you cannot. Ghusl does not remove.
It's not required.
No, I mean when you are taking shower.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody say they use the washroom, and then they just went and do so they don't have to do the wudu before they take a shower, right?
Good question.
Okay.
So if you go to the bathroom,
Mhm.
there's nothing exactly. You went to the bathroom and you decided to go take a shower.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to do wudu before you take the shower.
You can take a shower while making wudu. You can take a shower after. You can
Yeah.
You can make wudu after taking a shower. You don't have to make wudu unless you want to pray.
Right. So
Yeah,
if
suppose
you
it is after
so if it's just before Zuhr time, so you can make a wudu in the shower.
Yes.
And you pray, okay. But even
Yes.
if you're just taking a shower, you did not make the wudu, you can still do the salah and read
According to Abu Hanifa, yes.
and read the Quran.
Yeah, according to Abu Hanifa. Abu Hanifa does not view wudu as an act of worship. He views ghusl as an act of worship. He doesn't view wudu as an act of worship. He views it as cleanliness. So you don't need a formal intention, right? And Shamima and Sarah can correct me if I'm wrong because they studied Hanafi fiqh maybe a little more than I did. Right? But as far as I understand, Abu Hanifa, the Hanafi school, does not view wudu as an act of worship. So if you do something that cleans the parts of your body, that is required for wudu, like taking a shower, without making the intention, you're good,
You're good.
right? And I've heard some, Hanafis in this area, imams, think, oh, did I make wudu? Oh, you know what? I took a shower before I came, so
That's why I
and I'm sitting there thinking, like, yeah, I don't agree with that. Anyway, valid opinions.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did I miss the fact that you said the Prophet ﷺ sees wudu as an act of worship?
No, I didn't say the Prophet. I'm talking about the various schools, fiqh schools.
So I want to go back a step because the schools came later. If Abu Hanifa says that it's not an act of worship, what did the Prophet ﷺ say?
It's not about what the Prophet ﷺ said, it's about the verse in the Quran about wudu. إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ. If you stand up to pray, meaning the Mufassirin understood this as if you make the intention to pray, then perform wudu. Right? So there's that intentionality there. Plus, there's no logical explanation to wudu other than the fact that it's an act of worship.
Right.
Right? Because if I'm already clean, I still need to make wudu. Right? So there's no rational reasoning behind it, and therefore we see it as an act of worship. And every act of worship needs an intention.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. And I always feel that being in wudu also keeps away the shayateen from you if you're in a state of purity all the time.
Sure. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah, thank you for explaining.
You're
that.
welcome.
So then Abu Hanifa is saying that if you don't have to make the wudu to do the salah?
No,
I
only
don't-
if you take a shower.
If you take a shower or you went for a swim or you took a bath, you have been cleaned. And therefore the function of wudu has been achieved even if you didn't do the formal, acts of wudu. All right. باب غسل الرجل مع امرأته. The chapter about a man performing ghusl with his wife. عن عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها قالت كنت أغتسل أنا والنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من إناء واحد من قدح يقال له الفرق. So Aisha رضي الله تعالى عنها says that she and the Prophet would perform ghusl simultaneously, right, from one bucket. Right? I think it's pretty straightforward in this regard. باب الغسل بالصاع ونحوه. The chapter about completing ghusl with a saw of water, meaning a certain volume of water and a certain amount of water. If you remember the word mud, a mud is a handful, or like this, right? A saw is 4 of these. One saw is about 4 of these.
And the one that she talked about, I think Aisha, is 3 times as much as the saw, as the 4 times. So it's 12
قدح.
times القدح, yeah.
So-
الفرق.
الفرق or قدح.
الفرق 3 آصع.
Okay, so the faraq is 3 saws.
The saw is
So you're talking about 4, 8, 12 muds. Now, 1 mud you can estimate to about 1 pound, right? Maybe a little bit less. So you find in the books of fiqh,
Yeah, like 2 cups.
well, depending on what you have in your hand, the volume is going to differ. So in books of fiqh, a saw is equivalent to about 2 kilograms, so about 4.5 pounds. All right? Now, when it comes to Aisha and the Prophet, performing ghusl from a qadh, it doesn't mean they use it all. It doesn't mean they use all of the water there. Back in the day, you get a bucket, you will fill it, and you keep it, right? You're not going to keep going to the well every single day. It's too much work. Anyway, so the Prophet would perform ghusl in about 4 full hands worth of water. Right? So وعنها رضي الله تعالى عنها أنها سئلت عن غسل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فدعت بإناء نحو من صاع فاغتسلت وأفاضت على رأسها وبينها وبين السائل حجاب. Okay, here in Sahih Muslim, it gives a little bit more context. One of Aisha's nephews, someone who is a mahram to her, asked her how the Prophet ﷺ performed ghusl. So she had a hijab, like a towel, so to speak, pulled up, and she performed it. She showed him how to do it. Now to us, that's really strange. right? It's kind of bizarre. If people see it, they criticize it. So, did you understand?
See her silhouette probably, You have to be able to see her silhouette to know what she's
Not
doing.
necessarily. She could have just done it as a mock version. She didn't have to go to that extent.
What I'm thinking is, could she not have just described it instead of?
Yeah, describe it without doing it. Like say, okay, I'm gonna take water. You do this and this and
But she's
right.
saying he died in that one slide. Yeah, she did do the whole thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why some people see it strange. For her to disrobe behind something, right?
Well, maybe she did this job. You can do it over your clothes.
Why was there a hijab then? Right?
Different.
وَبَيْنَهَا وَبَيْنَ السَّائِلِ hijab. Now, once again, I emphasize, the one asking her is a mahram to her. I think it's one of her nephews, right? So her shoulders or her hair being visible is no problem. Or maybe her lower legs as well. I'm just bringing this because people feel discomforted by it, right? And, I mean, is there really a reason to be discomforted by it? Honestly, is there a reason to be discomforted by it? She's behind something, so what's so wrong with that? In the end, it's her nephew. It's not somebody who's strange, right? Again, I don't think it's a big deal. I'm just pointing it out to be very transparent, and because this is a question that's asked. How can Aisha do something like this? And she might even be attacked for it. It's like, oh, look at her, No, what's wrong with it? What's unethical about this? What did she do here that's haram? Nothing. Right? Next hadith عن جابر بن عبد الله رضي الله تعالى عنها أنه سأله رجل عن الغسل فقال يكفيك صاع فقال رجل ما يكفيني فقال جابر كان يكفي من هو أوفى منك شعرا وخير منك ثم أمهم في ثوب. So Jabir radiallahu ta'ala an was asked by somebody about the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam's ghusl. Or he asked more generally, how does a man perform ghusl? And it seems like the question he was really asking, how much water do I need? Like how drenched do I need to be here? Do I need to be soaking, dripping wet? And Jabir radiallahu ta'ala an said, yakfik sa'. This amount of water, this sa', is enough for you, right? So this man responded and said, no, it's not enough for me. And so Jabir responded and said, it was enough for somebody who had better hair than you and is better than you, meaning the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, right? Now, the spirit of the companions, right? One of the primary things that made them who they were is not just their love for the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, but the fact that they always took their questions back to the Prophet ﷺ. In other words, if I'm facing something, right? Should I do this or should I do that? The companions would automatically think, what did the Prophet do? And if I don't know what the Prophet did, what would he do? And this is just gold. Why? Because you can never go wrong with the Prophet ﷺ. Never. If you do what the Prophet did, how can you go wrong? How? You can't. ﷺ. So this is the spirit that they had. This is the connection that they had with the Prophet ﷺ. And the people who take the outer image of what they think the Prophet looked like, the beard, the siwak, the thobe, right? They walk around with their thobe halfway up their forelegs, right? And following the sunnah. Okay. Where the sunnah really matters, your relationship to the Prophet, love for the Prophet, is when you say, I have a decision to make, I have a problem, and your heart automatically goes back to Rasulullah. This is the true following of the sunnah. This is how the companions follow the sunnah. You don't see the companions saying, dress like this because the Rasulullah dressed like this. That's not what they did. That's not what they took from the sunnah. They took from the sunnah, what would the Prophet do? Alayhi salatu wassalam. The next chapter, باب من أفاض على رأسه ثلاثا. Chapter of pouring water on your head 3 times. عن جبير بن مطعم رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أما أنا فأفيض على رأسي ثلاثا وأشار بيديه كلتيهما. So the Prophet said, being asked about ghusl, he said, I pour water 3 times over my head like this. So he takes this, pours it, 1, 2, 3. And afterwards, he'd just start doing this with the water, right? Going to every part. Now with the shower, it's very easy to do. باب من بدأ بالحلاب أو الطيب عند الغسل. بالحلاب. What's حلاب? الحلاب الإناء يحلب.
يجمع فيه حليب الشاة أو
Okay.
الناقة.
أو الطيب.
الطيب يعني الريحة.
Yeah. Okay. So the chapter about what does this mean? It's إناء يحلو فيه. Maybe the hadith will clarify. عن عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها قالت كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا اغتسل من الجنابة دعا بشيء نحو الحلاب. Okay. The wording of the chapter is a little bit strange. I don't know what starting with this means, but the idea is the Prophet once used a bowl or a bucket that is normally used for gathering milk. All right, so when you have a bucket, you go and you milk a cow or a sheep or whatever, and that bucket is milk. So the Prophet used that. Now, I don't know if the purpose of this hadith or what Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha is really getting at is that there's a standard size for this type of bucket, and therefore it gives us an idea of how much water he used to use. Maybe that's it. Or the fact that something that's not water, a bucket that was used to contain something that's not water, was then used for ghusl, right? So you can imagine that maybe there's some residue of milk, right? So a little bit of remaining milk, or the flavor of that milk would impact the water that's in there, or the color of the water. Aisha is saying that the Prophet ﷺ used that, and it was okay, right? But I think what it's getting at is the size, right? دعا بشيء نحو الحلاب. He asked for a bucket that is similar to the hilab. So I think it's getting at the size here. But anyway, both are correct in terms of fiqhi stance. فأخذ بكفه فبدأ بشق رأسه الأيمن ثم الأيسر فقال بهما على وسط رأسه. So Aisha says that after pouring water, this is the context here, she didn't literally say, but after pouring water on his head, he started by rubbing the water over the entirety of his right side of the body. So he went here, up and down, and then he did the left side, right? Why? Because the right is preferred over the left. So we begin with the right over the left. All right. And then finally, he poured water over his head. It seems like he took the entire bucket and poured water over his head, and then just whatever happened. All right. Bab إذا جامع ثم عاد. The chapter if a marital relationship occurs and they want to do it a second time in the same setting. وعنها رضي الله تعالى عنها قالت كنت أطيب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فيطوف على نسائه ثم يصبح محرما ينضخ طيبا. All right, so again, I'll do my best to word this properly. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says that she would apply fragrances to the Prophet ﷺ. Now the fragrances back then, as we still have today, was oil-based, right? So when you go to Umrah and you go to these fragrance shops, right, like Al-Qurashi, Abdul Salam Al-Qurashi and whatnot, the high quality fragrances are they're oil based, right? You literally paste it on you. That was back then. So they would apply these fragrances on their hair, right, on their beards, and maybe on their skin as well. So Aisha did that for the Prophet ﷺ, and then he went to all of his wives. So it seems like here, and he did ihram afterwards. They're on Hajj here. And I think all of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ were with him when he performed Hajj. So he went to all of his wives. Now, based on the title of the chapter, it seems like he was intimate with all of his wives the same night. 9. Okay? People come and say, look at the Prophet, he's a womanizer, and. Right? Let's be honest here. A playboy is who exactly?
What was that people?
Right? When they use this term, so-and-so is a playboy. What do they mean by that?
When they have illicit relations.
Hmm?
When they have illicit relations.
When they have multiple.
Yeah. And
Right?
his wife.
The billionaire and the parties and all. Oh my. Why is that okay? Why is that not just okay, it's wow in their minds? But a man who has 9 wives, taking care of them all, 9 families, no, that's wrong, that's bad. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. Right?
Just to make us look bad.
And then they come and the Christians come. And they say, look at how immoral this is. Christianity teaches monogamy, 1 man, 1 woman. This is the way and whatnot. All you have to do is ask them, how many wives did Solomon have?
No count.
Hmm?
They probably
Eh.
don't even know.
No, it's in the Bible with their names. And I think it's 12. Okay, is this immoral? If it's immoral, then you have just accused one of your own prophets who you believe in as being immoral. Right? Anyway, this is a whole another topic. But it's in our faces right now. Now, another opinion, right? Some scholars understood this as he wasn't intimate with all of them. He went and he visited all of them, making sure that they're okay, right? So it could be understood this way. It could be understood that way. There's nothing in the hadith itself that clearly indicates that he was intimate with all of his wives, right? Where we infer this is the title of the chapter. And what we understand here is Bukhari, or the one who's writing this summary, understood from this hadith that this is what happened. But if you were just to analyze the hadith itself, there's nothing in it that indicates this. And what Aisha is getting at here is one of 2 things, depending on how you understand the hadith. If you understand the hadith as the Prophet was intimate with his wives, Aisha is saying the next morning he was muhrim. He wore the ihram. And what it's telling us is, from rituals of Hajj and Umrah, it is allowed to be intimate with one's spouse before wearing ihram. But after wearing ihram, you cannot until you are finished with the ihram, until you remove ihram. That's if you understand it this way. If you understand it as, you can understand it as in the following way as well, that applying fragrances prior to wearing ihram is allowed so long as it's not applied in places where your ihram will be wrapped around. Because we know in Hajj and Umrah, while in the state of ihram, you cannot apply fragrances. Right? So if you start ihram, and by the way, ihram is not wearing the clothing, ihram is the intention, the pronunciation of the beginning of your rituals. You know how when you go to the miqat and you say, Labayk Allahumma Umrah, even that's when Umrah starts, that's when Hajj starts, even if you're not wearing the clothing. Right? That's when your Umrah starts or your Hajj starts. So as soon as you make that proclamation or that announcement, you cannot apply fragrances anywhere on your body. Deodorants is not allowed. Scented creams aren't allowed. Scented lip balm is not allowed, etc. However, prior to that, you can apply fragrances so long as they are applied in places where the ihram clothing will not be affected by it. So if you think of a man, right, the ihram clothing is bottom and around here. If they apply fragrances on their hair, it's not going to come here.
So that's allowed.
That's allowed if it's done prior. Prior to, right. Okay.
So if you did, so if you did what Ghusl, supposedly, right? He did Ghusl, he did the tib, you know, the fragrance on those places, and then started with the ihram. So the smell is still there.
That's fine.
It's fine.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Okay. عن أنس رضي الله تعالى عنه قال كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يدور على نسائه في الساعة الواحدة من الليل والنهار وهن 11 وفي رواية 9 نسوة قيل أو كان يطيق ذلك قال كنا نتحدث أنه أعطي قوة 30. So Anas here is also reinforcing this position that what's meant by the Prophet visiting his wives is that he was intimate with all of them. But again, you still have the other opinion among scholars, right? So it's a possibility that this is how Anas interpreted what was going on. But it's not a necessity. I mean, he wasn't there, nor do I think that the Prophet was literally asked. So they asked Anas, how was he able to do that? I mean, how did he have the strength? And Anas says that we would say about the Prophet, meaning the companions, would say about the Prophet that he had the strength of 30 men. Right? Allah gave him the strength, the energy, the stamina, the vitality of 30 men. Babu man tatayyaba thumma ightasal. A chapter about someone who applies fragrances and then performs ghusl. عن عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها قالت كأني أنظر إلى وبيص الطيب في مفرق النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو محرم. So Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha here says, I still remember, I could still imagine, see in my mind the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam's fragrances. The oil gives that shiny look. Naturally, when you oil something, it becomes shiny. So Aisha is saying, I still remember like the shininess of his body after applying fragrances while he was wearing ihram. Okay. So again, I don't know why these hadith are placed here. Although you could see the ghusl aspect, I think it's more relevant in the chapter of Hajj, because that seems to be the main point here. Now, there's nothing in this particular hadith that indicates the Prophet performed ghusl, right? So what the author is getting at here is maybe the following. The title is saying applying fragrances and then performing ghusl prior to wearing ihram, right, or entering ihram. Now, I don't remember the variety of opinions in this regard in terms of the books of fiqh, but perhaps there is an opinion out there where, no, you're not allowed to have fragrances on, even if it's applied before, but what you're allowed to do is apply fragrances, take ghusl, because remember, ghusl is a sunnah. Performing ghusl prior to umrah or hajj is a sunnah. So if you apply the fragrances and then perform ghusl, then even if some of the oil remains, maybe the fragrance has gone. But I don't think that's what Aisha is saying. I mean, she's saying I can still literally see the fragrances that were applied on him. There's nothing that mentions ghusl here. But anyway, Bab Takhleel al-Sha'ri Athna' al-Ghusl. The chapter about putting your fingers between your hair during ghusl. وعنها رضي الله تعالى عنها قالت كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا اغتسل من الجنابة غسل يديه وتوضأ وضوءه للصلاة ثم اغتسل ثم يخلل بيده شعره حتى إذا ظن أنه قد أروى بشرته أفاض عليه الماء 3 مرات ثم غسل سائر جسده. So similar to what we were saying earlier, I don't think there's any new information in this particular hadith, but it's just highlighting this aspect of rubbing your scalp, putting your hands through your hair to make sure that water reaches your scalp. So I'm not going to... What's that?
Because he said, وتوضأ وضوءه للصلاة ثم اغتسل ثم يخلل يعني كأنه he went back, like he did the ghusl and then he went back to do the head of the body.
Well,
Thumma, right?
Yeah, possibly. The word thumma often connotes order. I did this, then this, then this. Then connotes order. right? This came before this, which came before this, which is the common use of the word thumma, but not necessarily. Thumma can also mean in conjunction with, simultaneously, right? Or generally in the same time, even though it might not have been in order. And there are examples of this in the Quran. I'm just not remembering exactly. I think one of the examples is ثم خلقنا النطفة علقة فخلقنا العلقة مضغة ثم خلق المضغة عظاما ثم كسونا العظام لحما. Here, talking about the stages of the development of the embryo, it uses the word thumma a few times here. Some scholars understood that this is order, right? Other scholars said no, it's not connoting order, it's saying this is all happening within the same time. Or for the embryo to be fully complete, to take full shape of a human being, all this happens at some period of time, even though it might not happen in the order in which it was presented. That's possible as well. All right? Allahu A'lam.
Is it possible, Shaykh, that when they said that Aisha said that I saw him in the street of Ihram in the morning for Hajj, that it is actually saying that he did visit his wives, but he was still he was in the state of cleanliness to be able to wear a gown. It doesn't say that he performed ghusl. That part is not mentioned. So what is the topic here? The topic is the necessity of doing ghusl.
So, no doubt one of the benefits here is you can imagine somebody going performing Hajj, right? They're so focused on the ritual that they think any involvement of worldly affairs is somehow going to reduce the quality of that worship. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. What we're understanding here, that's not the case. That's not the case. You can be intimate with your wife before or after, right? That doesn't, you're not prohibited from that, nor does it take away from the quality of your Hajj or the acceptability of your Hajj. Another example of this is in the Quran itself. لَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ أَن تَبْتَغُوا فَضْلًا مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. In the context of Hajj, if part of your Hajj is going to do business, no problem. No problem at all, right? So don't conflate this with this. Number two, if we were to understand that Aisha is at what, if we were to understand from the statement of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam entered the state of ihram in a state of major spiritual impurity, having not performed ghusl, then we're taking a fiqhi ruling that it's not a condition of starting Hajj and Umrah to be in a state of ablution. It's not a condition, right? Although doing tawaf, it is, right? But starting it, no problem. So you can imagine a scenario where these people they're traveling, right? The previous night, a man and a husband and wife were intimate. They wake up, all right, it's time, we're at the miqat. They don't have water. What do? It's okay, start your ihram and do ghusl later, right? That's a possibility as well. But again, we have to pay attention to the titles of the chapters. Bukhari is teaching us his positions from the titles of his chapter. Like he's telling you, this is what I understand from this hadith.
I see.
Right?
And they only, Prophet only performed Hajj once.
Yes, he performed Hajj once.
So whatever we have as the requirements or the situations related to Hajj is from that one trip.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Prophet says, خُذُوا عَنِّي مَنَاسِكَكُمْ. Learn the rituals from what I do. Allah Ta'ala Alam. We'll stop at hadith number 196. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.